This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is April 26th, 2025. For as long as I've been in this, there have been people who have been disingenuously trying to scapegoat Catholics for the crimes of organized Jewry, and they point out that Catholicism is a universal religion that seeks to take over and create a world government, which is certainly true, but the Catholics are not the apex of power. That whole quest for a world government comes out of Judaism. Catholicism is a product of Judaism, and the aim was always for Catholics to help create a global empire that would then be taken over and ruled by Jews and would be covertly run by Jews through the popes the entire time. I've proven that there were 14 Jewish popes. I've proven this by the Jews' own accounts. And I have been battling a bunch of con artists, propagandists, for 20 years who have been putting forth all kinds of lies that there is a Jesuit black pope who runs the world, and that, as Ye says, Jews are some kind of middle management who are being handled by whites, and the power of whites is concentrated in this Jesuit order and the black popes. And I've been pointing out to these charlatans that these key Catholic figures that they keep pointing to were all crypto-Jews. And they try to scapegoat Catholics for all these crimes of organized Jewry. And they try to portray the Jews as victims of the Catholics instead of Europeans being victims of Catholicism itself, which is a Jewish faith, and of these same figures that they point out as Catholics who have committed horrible crimes in the past. And it's very important to provide the proof of all this, which I'm about to do, to dispel all the lies that these deceitful propagandists in the fake alternative media are putting out about Catholics and the real nature of what it is that the Jesuits have done, who they are, who founded them, and what their mission is. And all this came about as part of the Counter-Reformation, in which the Lutherans, the Anglicans, the Protestants were also led by Talmudic people with close affiliations to the Jews or crypto-Jews themselves, like John Calvin. Martin Luther was very, very tight with the Talmudic Jews. He studied the Talmud. And all of these things are fulfilling this mission. The persecution of the Jews brought about by Protestants and by Catholics has been at the direction and discretion of Jews themselves. As I'm going to point out, the chief anti-Semite in the 19th century was a Jew named Wilhelm Marr, who had Jewish wives, worked for Jewish businesses, and was well known to be a crypto-Jew himself. These charlatans, these frauds, point to figures like Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, who was a crypto-Jew, Torquemada, the crypto-Jew, and Johannes Pfefferkorn, the Catholic crypto-Jew, and Jacob Frank, the leader of the Frankists, the supposed reincarnation of Shabbatai Tzvi, as all being Catholics who have persecuted the poor Jews who are victims of the Catholics. And these frauds never point out the fact that it's well known that these figures were all crypto-Jews. And the idea was always the persecution of the Jews was meant to drive the Jews to Palestine against their will. And I'm going to show how this evolved historically. All these things happened just like the Crusades. They persecuted the Jews, but they also sought to take over Palestine. And the goal of persecuting the Jews while they were taking over Palestine as crusaders was to incentivize the Jews to flee from Europe and live in Palestine. It was all a quest to restore the Jews to Palestine in the name of Christianity so that Jesus could return. And there were also two Jesuit crypto-Jewish rabbis named Ribera and Lacunza, who created a great deal of the mythology that became dispensationalism, which was incorporated into the Scofield Bible. They were both crypto-Jewish Jesuits. And the Catholics get blamed for all of that, and that became part of the chief Protestant theology of dispensationalism that was utilized to promote Zionism and created the evangelical Christian movement under John Nelson Darby. And all of this is not by accident, just as Hitler terrorized the Jews of Europe and sent them to Palestine. We had this movement of the Crusaders terrorizing the Jews of Europe in hopes of sending them to Palestine. But the chief crimes of the Catholics perpetrated against the Jews are said to be when Ferdinand II forced all Jews to become conversos and Marranos and crypto-Jews and pretend to be Catholics or be expelled. Ferdinand II, the Catholic King of Spain, was himself a crypto-Jew. The reason why he wanted to persecute Jews was to expel them from Spain so that they would flee to America. At the same time that he did that, the very same year, he sent the crypto-Jew Columbus to find America as a place where the Jews could congregate and form a nation that would then be transplanted to Palestine when the Messiah arrived. He also expelled the Jews to Holland, where a prominent Dutch Jew, descendant of the Jews of Spain, Manasseh ben Israel, said that the American Indians were the lost tribe of the Israelites. So this was part of this campaign to turn the Americas into a place where the Jews could congregate and settle as a community and avoid assimilation to ultimately be transplanted to Palestine. And Manasseh ben Israel and the Dutch Jews that Ferdinand II, Ferdinand and Isabella, Ferdinand the crypto-Jew, expelled to Holland, got involved in the machinations of the English Revolution, and Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan Protestant who led and participated in the English Revolution, where Charles I, who was affiliated with the Catholics and the French Catholics, was beheaded and supplanted and became the dictator after the chaos of Parliament had the people clamoring for the restoration of a dictator, after Cromwell and the Puritans said that Charles I had to go because he was a tyrant and a dictator. I've explained that process again and again. And Cromwell got involved with Manasseh ben Israel and was financed by the Dutch Jews, the Dutch Jewish bankers. William of Orange, was involved with the Dutch Jews and taking over England. It was the English who defeated the Catholic Spanish Armada. So the power shifted from Spain to England, and England became heavily involved in the Americas, and the Americas as a place in which the Jews could congregate to form this colony population that would eventually be transplanted to Palestine. The English Revolution was funded by a Jew named Chaim Solomon. So these plans all have a consistent model that they're following. The model is to persecute Jews in the name of Christianity or in the name of race politics, so that they are forced out of the European nations to form a colony that will eventually take over Palestine, which is exactly what happened after Hitler followed that model and chased them to Palestine. And when the crypto-Jew Ferdinand II expelled the Jews, they were also sent and welcomed into the Ottoman Empire, where their bankers and financiers helped to establish the Ottoman Empire in the hopes of eventually conquering Europe with the behemoth forces of Islam. The Turkish Ottoman Empire greatly expanded with the help of the Jewish financiers. Joseph of Nasi helped cement all of that. There was another financier, I can't remember his name at the moment, who was involved in financing the Ottoman Empire to build it up so that it would control Palestine and bring all the Jews into Palestine. Shabbatai Tzvi in 1666 got involved and created the Dernmei Muslim community of crypto-Jews in Salonika, Greece, who eventually overthrew the Ottoman Empire and attempted to completely exterminate the Armenians under the guise of the Freemasonic crypto-Jewish so-called Young Turks. So the crypto-Jew Ferdinand II helped set up those three very important evolutionary steps in the transition from the Catholic Empire to the Jewish world government and world empire. He sent Columbus, financed Columbus to go to America, to the crypto-Jew Columbus, to make it a homeland for Jews. He sent Jews into Holland, and the Dutch Jews, including Manasseh ben Israel, got involved with the British and the idea that the Jews had to be restored to England and sent to America because the American Indians were the 10 lost tribes, supposedly. And they got involved in funding the English Revolution to get rid of the monarchy. And all this was done in the name of eliminating tyranny, but they did it in a deliberate way to generate chaos so that the public itself would clamor for an even worse tyrant under their complete control, who was Oliver Cromwell, who became self-proclaimed dictator. This model was followed in the French Revolution, which was instigated in part by Moses Dobruschka, a nephew of Jacob Frank, who was a crypto-Jew who infiltrated the Catholic Church. And these frauds claim that all these crypto-Jews are these terrible Catholics that are constantly persecuting Jews. And Jacob Frank pointed out that very anti-Christian and anti-Jesus passages in the Talmud and in Toledat Yeshu and in Kabbalah to the Catholic Church so that Jews would be persecuted. But all of this was, again, a process of infiltration and subversion, and the persecution of the Jews had a purpose to it. It was to isolate them so that they remained a congruous people who did not assimilate among the Gentiles, and to form them into a core population that would eventually take over Palestine. And all of these Catholic crypto-Jews have been following that exact same model. And Jacob Frank was also involved with the Dernmei and visited Salonika, Greece, where the Dernmei were fomenting the ultimate overthrow of the caliphate and sultanate of the Ottoman Empire. So let's start digging into the proof, because I can already hear now that they're going to claim that this is all lies and I'm making all this up. They've been lying about me for 30 years, but I bring the receipts, as they say today, and I provide the proof. So let's start getting into that proof. But keep in mind the three things that crypto-Jew King Ferdinand II of Spain, husband to Isabella, did by persecuting the Jews and essentially expelling them from Spain. He drove them to Holland, where they became the bankers and the Dutch Jews that eventually took over the England that had soon thereafter defeated the Spanish Armada to become the naval fleet and the Leviathan of the West that they want to pit against the behemoth of Islam and Marxism of the Eurasianist East. He sent Columbus to discover America, to become a homeland for Jews. And those same Dutch Jews that came from Spain, Manasseh ben Israel, claimed that the Indians of America were the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And he sent Jews to Salonika, Greece, and to the Ottoman Empire to build up the Turkish Empire so that the Eurasianist behemoth of Islam could conquer Europe. And they took over the whole Mediterranean rim and could conquer and maintain Palestine to eventually subvert that empire, as they always were doing with Catholicism, so that eventually they could transplant this core Jewish population into Palestine. So this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. I think this was published in 1903. Ferdinand and Isabella. His marriage, Ferdinand II, under different auspices of kingship. He was also Ferdinand V, the Catholic. His marriage with the much admired Isabella of Castile and granddaughter of the beautiful Jewess Paloma of Toledo. While still heir to the throne, Ferdinand had friendly dealings with many Marranos. His marriage with the much admired Isabella of Castile was materially furthered by Jews and Marranos on the supposition that he himself, of Jewish descent on his mother's side, would prove, like his father, benevolent toward the Jews. I proved that Ferdinand II was a crypto-Jew in my book in 2006, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein. I had been researching that for more than 10 years. Prior to that, you don't write a 3,000-page book quickly, believe me. So there is the proof among various sources. This is only one that I've found, the Jewish Encyclopedia of 1903. Let's see if we can pull up the cover for that. Well, it doesn't. You'll find it in the article for the Jewish Encyclopedia. So this was that terrible Catholic persecutor of the Jews, Ferdinand II. Well, guess what? He was a Jew himself. He was following the Jewish agenda to try the Jews in a furnace of affliction, to keep them segregated from Gentiles by fomenting the hate of Esau against Jacob so that Jews would be preserved and not assimilate. And he sent them to America, Holland, and the Ottoman Empire for the reasons I stated. Another of these conversos, these Marrano crypto-Jews, like Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, wrote that the great persecutor of the Jews, Tomás Torquemada, was himself a crypto-Jew. And he proved this by his Tomás's uncle Juan de Torquemada, and this has historically been well known. This was written in the 1500s by a crypto-Jew himself, by a converso, by a Marrano, and you can see here Don Juan de Torquemada, Cardinal de San Sixto, sue hombre alto Well, it goes on and it says, that he is descended from the line of the Jews who converted to the Catholic faith. So Torquemada is descended from Jews who converted to the Catholic faith. The great persecutor of the Inquisition, the Catholic demon who so vilely persecuted Jews in his much exaggerated Inquisition, which has been utilized to stigmatize Catholicism and portray Jews as perpetual victims ever since, was himself a converso, a Marrano, a crypto-Jew who was created by the crypto-Jew Ferdinand II, who demanded conversion and confession of Christ or expulsion, all to fulfill the ancient, now called Zionist Jewish agenda of restoring the Jews to Palestine. And that agenda was put forward in the book of Deuteronomy and the books of the prophets of the Old Testament, so that the Jews, and this was written before it happened, centuries before it happened, would be expelled out into the world so that they could take over, go to the ends of the earth, take over every kingdom and convert it to fulfilling the Jewish mission of destroying paganism, creating a world empire which would eventually be run by the Jewish Messiah, King Messiah, Messiah, son of David, out of Jerusalem, out of Zion, and ultimately all the Gentiles would be exterminated and would exterminate each other as the Christians and Muslims battling each other as the Leviathan and Behemoth. And all this was set up by these crypto-Jews who went out, as was always the plan, in the diaspora, in the exile, into the ends of the earth, took over all the monarchies, subverted them, created all the revolutions, and pitted brother against brother, Gentile against Gentile, so they would exterminate each other, get rid of all paganism, burn pagans at the stake, which was another part of that beautiful crypto-Jewish Inquisition, and get the Catholics and the Reformists, the Protestants, who were both headed by Jews and crypto-Jews and by Talmudism, to fight each other and kill each other. That was one of the bloodiest parts of European history, was the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, the 30 Years' War, especially in the northern countries. The Jews considered the Nordic Europeans to be their greatest opposition and greatest threat to them, the Hyperboreans, the superior intellectual supposed master race that they continually seek to exterminate. And they created this Reformation in Northern Europe and in England so that these forces would fight the Catholics and mutually destroy one another, just as they created Catholics in the first place to destroy paganism and to get Europeans to commit suicide in the name of Judaism and worship the ancestors of the Jews, abandon their ancestral gods, abandon their own ancestors, believe that their ancestors are boiling in hell because they didn't worship the God of Israel. And they created Islam to pit the Gentiles against each other, the Catholics against the Muslims. And this has been an ongoing model that's going on right now. We see all kinds of antichrists appearing, and now we got a Muslim antichrist so that the people take their eyes off of Donald Trump as the antichrist. So Torquemada, the head of the Inquisition, was himself a Marrano, a crypto-Jew. In this same vein of creating persecution of the Jews by a crypto-Jewish Catholic, there was Johannes Pfefferkorn. Wilhelm Marr was a Lutheran, I believe, but he was also a crypto-Jew. I guess we'll get to him soon. But Johannes Pfefferkorn was a German Catholic theologian and writer who converted from Judaism Pfefferkorn actively preached against the Jews and attempted to destroy copies of the Talmud. That's exactly what the crypto-Jew Jacob Frank would do. And these frauds used to go on internet radio all the time, and I would call into the shows that would have them on from like 2006 to 2008, when they would talk about Jacob Frank and Ferdinand II and Torquemada and Trebitsch Lincoln and John Kerry and Madeleine Albright, and how horrible these Catholics were. And I would point out to their faces that all these supposed horrible Catholics were crypto-Jews. And Jacob Frank was among them. Was a Polish Jewish religious leader who claimed to be the reincarnation of the self-proclaimed Shabbatai Tzvi, who created the Dern-May and set them up with Osman Baba, Baruch Russo, who was also said to be a reincarnation of Shabbatai Tzvi, who set up the Dern-May, and then Frank came along, and Frank got involved with the Dern-May and set up all the plans in his red letters for the coming communist revolutions and the world wars that so decimated Europe and so harmed those terrible Christians who were always persecuting the Jews, who just happened to be Jews themselves. The creators of this whole mythology of the rapture and a lot of the mythologies around the Antichrist and a great deal of the theology which became dispensationalism under Darby and got incorporated into the Scofield Bible. The Zionist Scofield Bible was set up by Jewish rabbis who were also these Marrano crypto Jews in the Jesuits. And they were named Francisco Ribera and Manuel Lacunza. And they created this whole idea of the rapture and all kinds of talk about the Antichrist. And they wanted all this to happen so that the ancient Jewish messianic apocalyptic prophecies would be fulfilled, and that the Catholics would play their role in deliberately and artificially fulfilling those prophecies, which have always been the plans of organized Jewry. Francisco Ribero, Society of Jesus, he was a Jesuit. All kinds of apocalypse commentary involved in that counter-reformation, the Catholic counter-reformation against the Protestants, which took 8 to 10 million lives, especially among the best of the Northern European peoples. And he was involved with creating the rapture. The other guy who followed up on Ribera a couple centuries later was Manuel Lacunza, who wrote under the pseudonym, supposedly a pseudonym, Rabbi Juan Yosefat ben Ezra. He was a crypto Jew, and he inspired the dispensationalists. And this whole mythology of the rapture traveled from Ribera through Lacunza into dispensationalism. A lot of the mythology surrounding the Antichrist traveled that same route. So we see that the Jesuits are actually a bunch of crypto Jews, at least in their formation and in their leadership. We recently had the Jesuit Marxist Pope Francis, who was following the Jewish agenda of the Jesuits and the Jewish agenda of Karl Marx. Manasseh ben Israel, the Dutch Jew, Jewish scholar, rabbi, Kabbalist. He was a Zionist. He got involved with Cromwell and the Dutch and William of Orange and the funding and instigation of the English Revolution and the idea that England and America should become a homeland for Jews so that Jews would fulfill the prophecy of being dispersed out to the ends of the earth so that Jesus could return and so that all the Jews could be brought back to Palestine. And he put forward the mythology that the American Indians and Native Americans were the lost 10 tribes of the Israelites, so he could seize America in the name of the Jews. And this was picked up a couple centuries later, not even a century and a half later, by Judge Noah, Mordecai Emanuel Noah in America, who was pitching Zionism in America from 1814 onward, the same time that the Rothschilds started propagandizing for Zionism around the world in newspapers, especially in New York and London, saying that they would buy Palestine from that Ottoman Empire into which Ferdinand II, the crypto-Jew, had sent the Jews to take over and dominate so that it could conquer Europe, conquer Palestine, and make it a homeland for the Jews. You see how all these forces combine, and I'm the only person in the world who ever made sense out of all this. I made sense out of World War II, out of World War I, out of the Crusades, out of the Armenian genocide. It is all this same model. Persecute the Jews in the exile to incentivize them to form a Zionist population to colonize Palestine. At the same time, take Palestine out of the hands of the Muslims and hand it over to the Jews and pit the Jews and the Christians against one another as the Leviathan so that they mutually consume each other. I was the only one in the world who put this all together, and once you see it, everything that people say made no sense at all, that were just unnecessary, terrible catastrophes led by madmen dictators. I showed that it was all this same orchestrated plan and this exact same model played out over and over again until it finally succeeded. And I'm warning you, pay attention. I'm warning you that the next phase of this is our complete extermination. So, Billy of Orange, William III of England, was a Dutchman who was tied in with this clique of Dutch Jews that were expelled from Spain by Ferdinand II, and that's all a complex history. It did terrible, terrible harm to the Irish Catholics, and it was involved in setting up England to be the Jewish Empire, to succeed the Jewish Empire of Spain, and to reap all that wealth and to set up America to become a major force behind Zionism and a place in which Jews could congregate to form the core population that would then be transferred to Palestine. That was always the plan. That plan was fulfilled. They pulled it off. And all of these idiots looked to Ferdinand II, to Adolf Hitler, to the Sultan of Turkey. They looked to them as if they're heroes for opposing the Jews, not realizing that they were agents of the Jews, and many of them crypto-Jews themselves, who were fulfilling the prophet of Isaiah, that Jews should suffer a Holocaust in the furnace of affliction to be redeemed and restored to Palestine. That is why I keep warning people that these alternative media figures who are celebrating Hitler, Ferdinand II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, they are duping you into running over this same model again to set you up to exterminate yourselves, and there will be no second chances if they succeed in this. They are playing out the same model and looking to the same historical figures who themselves were pawns and kings and queens in this same model of fulfilling this plan, which is clearly laid out in Deuteronomy, which appeared in the Septuagint in the 270s BC, long before Christianity came about, as fulfillment of that same model. They are setting you up. That is why my voice is suppressed. That is why they blacklist me, because they are a part of this agenda to set you up to commit suicide for their benefit and fulfill all of these prophecies artificially, utilizing these prophecies as their plans, as I've been saying for decades, to exterminate us. When you see these people waving the swastika banner, waving the cross, that represents Aleph and Tav, the Alpha and the Omega of the Hebrew alphabet. The Tav is the end. They are bringing back Christian nationalism to fulfill the cycle of the age of Pisces, which is to culminate in our extermination. These neo-Nazis and Christian nationalists are replaying this same exact model. And I said 20 years ago, very publicly in my books and in my interviews and my videos, in my blog posts, everywhere I could get anyone to listen. 20 years ago, I was saying there would be a resurgence in anti-Semitism. It would be led by neo-Nazis and Christian nationalists, and it would be utilized to break up the Western alliance, to pit us against each other, to create a rise in the Eurasianist forces to come and exterminate us. I warned you that all this was coming, and I pointed out every step of the way who were the leading figures in this and how they were deceiving people and setting us all up to commit collective suicide. This is the same historical pattern, and it is not coincidental that it is being played out over and over again. And we are reaching the crescendo of all of this, which from day one was meant to kill us all off. I pointed out 20 years ago in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, that Columbus was a crypto Jew, and that the whole idea behind the Spanish sponsoring his discovery of America was so that they could fulfill these messianic prophecies and create a homeland for the Jews outside Palestine, so that when the Messiah arrived, they had to wait for the Messiah to arrive, who arrived in the form of Shabbatai Tzvi. They could then transfer this population from America to Palestine, just as Judge Mordecai Emanuel Noah was pushing. And I was the first one to republish all of Mordecai Emanuel Noah's writings on Zionism from 1814 through 1844 or 1845 in my book, the first edition of my book, The Jewish Genocide of Armenian Christians. I republished all of these articles and the articles that the Rothschilds were putting out at the same time, calling for the restoration of the Jews to Palestine. So Christopher Columbus, Merrill made the case that in that same paper that Columbus was the son of Catalans and his mother possibly a member of a prominent converted Jewish family. Columbus was a crypto Jew. I was talking about that 20 years ago, and just last year, or I forget when it was, maybe even early this year, they found DNA evidence to prove that thesis. And as I showed in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, that was played up in the early 20th century in a journal, The World's Work, among others. They played up the idea that Columbus was a crypto-Jew and that America was slated to become a homeland for the Jews in preparation for the transfer of the Jews then from America to Palestine. And this was in the era when America became a terminal point for the departure of the Jews out of Russia on the pretext of the pogroms that took place in the 1880s after the Jews instigated the assassination. I think it was of Tsar Alexander III. There were supposedly great persecutions of the Jews, and some of the czars opposed Zionism. And they played that up heavily in the press. Most of it was fabricated. The pogroms in Poland were mostly fabricated, and all of them were greatly exaggerated. And that was used as a pretext to open up the gates to the Jews flooding out of the Pale of Settlement of Russia to America. The Statue of Liberty was created by French Freemasons, and a Sephardic Jew wrote that famous poem that was placed on a plaque on the Statue of Liberty, which represents Shekinah opening up her wings to shelter the Jewish people in America. That was the fulfillment of Judge Mordecai Emanuel Noah. That was the fulfillment of Manasseh ben Israel. This idea, and Ferdinand II, this idea that America would become a homeland to congregate the Jews and then eventually transfer that population to Palestine. Joseph Nazi, I mentioned him earlier. He was a Sephardic Jew who insinuated himself into the Ottoman Empire. I wish I could remember the name of that banker who helped finance the Ottoman Empire, a court Jew. He was appointed Lord of Tiberias with the expressed aim of resettling Jews in Palestine and encouraging industry there. I hope I'm making clear to you that this is all orchestrated. This is all the fulfillment of the plans laid out in Deuteronomy 3 centuries BC. This is a plan that ultimately calls for our complete extermination. And when is that to happen? That's to happen right now. That is why we see the world being deliberately thrown into turmoil, the destruction of the Western alliance by the crypto Jew, Donald Trump. Something that occurred to me just the other day. Isn't it funny how the very same voices in the fake alternative media who were decrying Biden and screaming that the sky is falling and Biden's going to bring us into World War III by defending Ukraine from Russian aggression, those same voices don't say anything about Donald Trump bringing us towards World War III by confronting the Chinese and their exploitation of American markets. No, even though the Chinese are threatening war and saying they'll fight it to the end, which is a veiled threat of nuclear war, they don't say a word about Donald Trump driving us towards World War III. These are all partisan frauds, and they're playing a dialectic in which the Democrats represent the interests of communist China and the Republicans represent the interests of communist Russia. And heads, they win, tails, you lose. Either way, we're screwed. And they just ratchet things up. One side brings the Jewish agenda over on the side of the Russians, and the other side brings the Jewish agenda over on the side of the Chinese. And then people get pissed off and they flip-flop back and forth, and the Jews continually progress as we continually get torn down and destroyed. I think it was in a conversation I had arguing with Eric John Phelps a very long time ago, where he was talking about Ignatius Timothy Trebitsch Lincoln as one of those horrible Catholics who helped the Nazis, and he helped finance Hitler to buy the Völkischer Beobachter the propaganda newspaper for the Nazis. He gave Hitler all kinds of money. He helped Hitler in his connections and rise. And this was supposedly done by this horrible Catholic. Well, as I pointed out to Mr. Phelps, who I think was involved with Jewish diamond merchants in Israel and was pushing this talk against Catholics and Jesuits at the time, that this guy was actually Jewish, and he was a Jewish Zionist, and he was helping the Nazis because the Nazis were Zionists and Bolsheviks, and he was helping them to force the Jews to emigrate down to Palestine, as they did under the transfer agreement in which Adolf Hitler fulfilled political Zionist Theodor Herzl's plans to utilize an anti-Semitic movement in Europe to profit the government of that anti-Semitic movement by transferring Jews to Palestine. They followed Herzl's plan exactly and redubbed it Ha'avara, the transfer agreement. So Lincoln, Ignatius, as in Ignatius Loyola, the crypto-Jewish Jesuit, was a Hungarian-born adventurer and convicted con man born in Hungary of Jewish descent, just like Theodor Herzl. And these Hungarian Jews are descendants of the Frankists, who became Hasidic Jews and the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Galicia. And that core of Hungarian Frankists produced many of the leading crypto-Jewish Frankists who have been subverting us, and many of whom have participated in the major anti-Semitic movements to follow this same model, this same furnace of affliction, driving the Jews out of Europe and out of America into Palestine by making them feel the heat of the furnace of affliction of Isaiah. Was a Hungarian-born adventurer, and in my books I gave the whole history of this guy. He's really a fascinating figure, the way he became a member of parliament and the way he got involved with the Dalai Lama and the Nazis in Tibet, and it's really fascinating history. I won't digress, but I discuss it in several of my books. Born in Hungary of Jewish descent, he spent much of his life traveling the world, engaging in various confidence scams, kind of like Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic Jews. Among his adventures, he posed as a Protestant missionary, Anglican priest, British member of Parliament for Darlington, German right-wing politician and spy, Nazi collaborator, Buddhist abbot in China, and self-proclaimed Dalai Lama. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with conmen and frauds, Judas goats, Pied Pipers, leading you into your own destruction. And we have one core group of these scapegoating the Catholics and the Jesuits for the crimes of organized Jewry. And then we have another core group of these trying to create a neo-Nazi movement and Christian nationalism. And now we see the combination of those two in Ye's pronouncements that the Jews are middlemen for the white man, and the white man's power is centered in the Catholic Church. It was a big deal when this came out some 20 years ago. John Kerry, the great Irish Catholic, his father was raised Catholic. John's paternal grandparents were Austro-Hungarian Jewish immigrants who converted to Catholicism. What did I just say? The Hungarian Jews, the Frankists. These are the core crypto Jews, the worst of the worst. And John Kerry is descended from them. I think Nicolas Sarkozy is also descended from Francus and maybe through Hungary. I can't quite remember. This all came out at about the same time. And we have Madeleine Albright, who said it was worth it to kill 500,000 Iraqi babies to mass murder those children, those infants, in the name of America. And she was ridiculed as being one of these evil Catholics harming the world and seeking to create a global government and take over the world for the Roman Pope. But as it turns out, Joseph and Anna converted from Judaism to Catholicism in 1941, her parents. Marie, Jana, and her siblings were raised in the Roman Catholic faith. In 1997, Albright said her parents never told her or her two siblings about their Jewish ancestry and heritage. And just coincidentally, this crypto Jew was cheerleading for America to commit genocide against Iraq and to wipe out Saddam Hussein. Well, it just so happens that Babylon is Iraq, and this is a payment of the ancient debt of the Babylonians sending the Jews into exile. Guess who else sent the Jews into exile? It was the Romans, who are the descendants of the Romans. We Europeans are the descendants of the Romans. And according to the Jews, we are the reincarnation of the souls of the Romans. So we have to pay the same debt that the Babylonians paid, that the Iraqis paid. And that is complete extermination as the Edomite, Amalekite Romans, as I've been saying for 30 years. That is where this is all headed. That is why we have Trump and Orban and Starmer and Macron, all of the heads of the former Western alliance, fighting with one another and driving us into suicidal extermination, into wars with the Muslims. They are scapegoating us. They are scapegoating the Catholics for all of this, which was instead organized and in many instances perpetrated by crypto Jews who feign the Catholic faith. This was a plan for Catholicism from the first bishop of Rome, Peter. This was the plan of Christianity when Christianity was fabricated. This is the plan of Islam that was fabricated by Muhammad and his two Jewish wives and his Jewish grandmother or whatever it was. It's all a setup. And the fake alternative media is setting you up to play along with this game, this same ancient model to once again whip up anti-Semitism, but to completely control it, to direct it, while at the same time scapegoating Europeans and Christians and Muslims for everything it is that organized Jewry is doing, all of its crimes, and for this ancient plan. Christianity, Islam, and Marxism were all created to be globalist empires, but empires that would be taken over and covertly run by Jews after they had destroyed all paganism. All three of them are anti the religions of the Gentiles. All three of them fulfill the exact same plan to make the Jews the sole inheritors of the earth, to have the Gentiles perceive themselves as inherently evil and in need of redemption through their extermination. Christians say the flesh is the corpse and we need a heavenly kingdom, so we all have to die to venture out into this heavenly kingdom. The Marxists say the best among the Gentiles must be killed. The bourgeoisie must be killed. That's exactly what Shimon Bar Yochai said as one of the as the greatest sage of the Talmud and supposed author of the Zohar. Islam, with its Mahdi and the return of Jesus, bringing about these great slaughters of the Gentile people, of there being no God, but Allah. And this quest of the soul to leap across the planets. All of this is Kabbalah. All of this is the oral tradition of Judaism. And all of this was deliberately engineered to bring about what is happening today, which is meant to culminate in our complete extermination. So, once again, after doing this for 20 years, I find myself back in the same seat, explaining the fact that these alternative media charlatans, these paid agents of organized Jewry, are boosted and promoted while I am silenced and censored and plagiarized broadly across the internet, because they are setting you up and they are lying to you, and they are saying that the whites and the Catholics and the Jesuits and the Black Pope are the top of the pyramid, and the Jews are the poor victims of all these forces, and that the Jews are just the middlemen, and they are puppets who are on the strings of these higher powers of the whites, the Anglo-Saxons, the Atlanticists, the Pope, the Jesuits, and it's all complete BS. It's absolute nonsense. It's demonstrable nonsense. We know where the apex of power is to be. We know why all these movements are engineered to fulfill these exact same plans and pursue this identical model, which I fully explained in my book, The Manufacture of Sale and Sale of St. Einstein, and have further expounded upon and expanded upon in my subsequent books, which you can find at my website, CJBbooks.com. I want to thank all of my contributors for standing by me in this struggle for these 30 years to get this truth out to you, to provide you with my insights into all this, my unique research, my unique insights, my novel and completely unique theories that no human being ever had before me. And I would not be able to do it without their help. And I'm deeply grateful to you. And if you would like to help contribute, you can do so at my website, CJBbooks.com, where you'll find not only my books, but contribution links. And because of those kind and generous contributions, I have been able to replace my first generation camera, which I had all kinds of audio issues and several other issues with that scrapped a couple of really great videos. I put one of them up and people complained about the audio, but it was, I'm a poor carpenter with poor tools. But as my intuition said, they were about to replace that with a fifth generation. And lo and behold, my intuition was right. They just came out with the fifth generation of that camera, which I have now acquired. It enables me to utilize a Bluetooth remote microphone. As I expected, it has much better low light capabilities and should have better color and resolution. And it allows me to record simultaneously in different viewpoints. It's everything I was hoping for and waiting for and expected. And I got my hands on it. Thanks to your kind and generous, wonderful contributions from my contributors. And if you want to keep me going, I would like to make some trips to produce some videos in some very exotic and telling environments in which I can explain this Kabbalah drama by with direct visual representations of it, as I've been doing in my drives and my walk and talks, like when I went to the Indian ruins or when I walked through the forest. It helps me to put all of these ideas into an environment which makes it more palpable and intelligible and understandable for you good people. I know this is very complex, and my theories are completely unique, and my insights are brand new and my own, and you've never been exposed to this before. No one has, because I created it. But I think I can artistically present it better and in a more digestible and intelligible way by putting you into environments in which I can visually use visual aids to help explain all this. And if people continue to contribute, I'm going to put monies towards traveling and putting all of this into the context of these exotic environments. And now I can even do it in nighttime environments to make it more dramatic, more understandable, and more watchable for you. And it also enables me to solidify my insights and come up with new insights. And I'm greatly appreciative of everyone who is helping me to accomplish that. And you can look forward to that in the very near future. I am learning how to utilize all this equipment and get the most out of it. And I'm very excited about moving forward with that. So beware the fake alternative media who blacklist me, steal my work, smear me, and beware the world to come. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you wonderful people next time. Goodbye for now.